This is the invisible head, the overdue collapse of India and the Philippines. What the heck is this about?
This is Pearl Global Industries, a garment factory in Gurugram, right on the outskirts of Delhi in India. And it's known amongst other things for having some of the most brutal working conditions in the world, with workers often clocking in 14-hour shifts, making clothes for Gap, Zara, even Ralph Lauren. However, if you were to go there today, you'd notice something strange. All of the workers would be wearing one of these, a tiny camera strapped onto their forehead, which tracks their every movement, from the angle they guide fabric under a needle, to the exact motion of folding a finished shirt. All of that information is then fed into an AI training system, being trained to replace the exact same worker that it's learning from. The conditions of workers in these kind of factories are
honestly smart. Give the, I mean, I don't mean to be demeaning, but the machines will be able to pump out more. They'd be able to be far more intricate. They wouldn't miss a stitch, hopefully, unless there's a technical error. It just makes sense, and it'd be cheaper in the long run. All you need is a few mechanics to observe the entire thing, than having to pay, well, you would probably pay the same mechanics, the same you would pay an entire workforce.
Across Asia are awful. But in most cases, the only other alternative is having no job at all, living in abject poverty. In fact, in India, the share of people in poverty has fallen from 45% to just 5% in only a matter of decades. And it's in no small part because of these economies which have been built around outsourcing jobs. But what happens when those jobs disappear?
AI is taking the jobs.
A couple of months ago, Oracle, one of the world's largest companies, laid off 30,000 outsourced workers globally, and 12,000 of them were in India. Salesforce then did the same, with their own CEO saying AI was now able to handle 50% of customer service interactions. Even TCS, which is one of India's own largest IT firms, has begun to fire its employees. It's easy to ignore what's going on here as just an abstract example of things which are happening in countries thousands of miles away from where we are right now. But what's really going on in these countries right now is a warning of what's about to come to the whole of the Western world. As the value of knowledge work seems to continue to diminish, it's really only a matter of time until we see the same thing taking place everywhere. These are the first countries to be broken by AI and the overdue collapse of outsourcing. I want you to take a look at this map here. It's nothing fancy, but it shows the proportion of a country's trade, which comes from selling services to the rest of the world. And as you might expect, the vast majority of relatively poor countries have very little of their economy dedicated towards services. Instead, they tend to be focused on things like agriculture or manufacturing. While on the other hand, most European countries see more or less the opposite. Think of people in white-collar offices. But zooming in here, you can see that there are a few exceptions. India and most of the other countries around the South China Sea have economies that are highly specialized in services, despite the fact that they're far poorer than most developed nations. And this puts them in the somewhat unique position of having the economic structure of a rich country with a poor country's income. See, for pretty much all of modern human history, countries have gotten rich by first moving from agriculture to manufacturing, and then to services. But by the start of the 2000s, China was beginning to change that trajectory. Their sheer size meant that they'd pretty much absorbed most of the other opportunities that different countries had to progress in manufacturing, as its share of the world's manufacturing went from just 5% to well over 20%. So rather than trying to beat China at its own game, a few countries tried to do something at the time that had basically never been done before. Jump from producing agriculture straight to selling services. The basic theory was that since the explosion of internet technology in the early 2000s, there was now a huge demand for all sorts of internet tech support, and a lot of these jobs were actually fairly low skilled and repetitive, exactly the kind of work that didn't have to be done by someone in a Western office. Instead, it was a perfect gap for another country to come in and fill. And to be able to do that, you basically only had to do two things. You had to have a fairly decent education and a somewhat good proficiency in English. And in Southeast Asia, there were two countries that fit that bill perfectly: India and the Philippines. Thanks to nearly half a century of American colonial rule, the Philippines typically ranks as the highest in English proficiency across all of Asia. And while India doesn't score as well overall, their sheer size and massive population means that they've effectively got one of the largest English-speaking populations on the planet. Now, imagine you're the CEO of a large Fortune 500 company that sells, let's say, cloud software, and you need people to answer calls and respond to customer questions about that software. You could hire a person at the company HQ in New York for $100,000 a year. Or you could go to India and get a fairly similar role for, let's say, $8,000 a year. For someone focused on the bottom line, it's a pretty obvious choice. So throughout the early 2010s, the outsourcing industry in these countries exploded, nearly tripling in size in just a decade. Between India and the Philippines, this industry generates around $290 billion every year, roughly equivalent to the entire economic output of Portugal.
And the fact that AI can easily fill those voids, and not only that, AI will be able to interpret and understand every language. Well, at least almost every language. So you don't need to have special interpreters for each location. You just need to, so that means more of these companies can go more global than just English speaking areas or just hire people on staff to speak for those locations. No, they could have the AI interpret the majority of it for them. So that way people know exactly what needs to be done. And again, I'm all for AI as a tool. I'm all for it as a tool. I'm not for it for like absolute slop. I'm not for it for slops. I mean, there are some informative videos that are done with AI, like I've seen, which are sometimes entertaining and fun to go through. But again, I prefer like the creation of content rather than the AI nonsense. But AI is a tool that should be utilized. It absolutely should be utilized.
And the success of this very industry is a big part of why these two countries have experienced such rapid rates of economic growth over the last couple of decades. However, now imagine that you're that same Fortune 500 CEO, looking at your options for people to respond to customer questions. You can still get the expensive employee in New York, or the far cheaper alternative in India, but there's now a third option, using artificial intelligence. Instead of an employee, this whole process is now just automated. In theory, not just making it cheaper, but also meaning you don't need to worry about employment laws or pesky reporters who ask about your overseas sweatshops and cheap labor. To anyone running a business, automating with AI is pretty much a no-brainer. Even using cheap foreign labor and outsourced operation.
But now companies are still being skeptical as it costs them more due to expensive subscriptions. Yeah, the expensive subscriptions absolutely will be a factor until, what is it? The server farms. As soon as they build more server farms, I'm hoping that the subscription services will go down, at least for like AI computing, because these server farms will sell locations just for companies. So companies will buy AI server farms, like a section of it exclusively for themselves. Especially like if it's in demand, depending on certain hours. So that way server farms could have several companies operating out of the same spot, just they're in a queue for which one has the higher influx at specific points in time. When do they get massive call logs? When do people sign in and get massive search inquiries? Eventually, I hope for companies especially, it will go down, which honestly would be worse for like those call centers, because if they just migrate over to the AI subscription model in a data server farm, and they can literally just lease out a section, kind of like how cloud services work in a company, where you can get like programs as a service, or like infrastructure as a service, or like software as a service. You know, you have all those things that you could get for your company. Now you'll have AI as a service where you can purchase that for your company, and it will have enough brain power to service your company, where calls and inquiries will go through that before it gets to the company, and then someone physical will have to deal with it. At least that's how I perceive it. I've heard my cousin who worked on similar company told me he alone uses AI tools worth $5,000 per month. Yeah. Again, it's expensive. It's absolutely expensive. But those cloud-based services are expensive, especially as a company. But it's far cheaper in the long run as a company to use a cloud-based service than to have your own server farms and things like that. It just is. That's normally, you have to think as a company and the longevity of it and the growth of it. Will you be able to grow far quicker? Can you downsize on other things when you can? I've been trying to further my education on this stuff. So it's like, for me, I'm seeing it from that perspective, and I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. It does make sense. But the server farms need to be built, and we need to build far more, especially with this huge boom of AI. I still want to get 2 more sticks of RAM, but they're at like $1,200 for 2 sticks that used to cost $200, or more like $180. They used to cost $180. Now they're $1,296.
Typically costs somewhere between $6 to $12 per resolution. AI, meanwhile, lands at around $1.50. So it therefore shouldn't come as a surprise that companies all around the world are abandoning this outsourcing model en masse, right? Except that's not quite what's going on here. Because, as it turns out, AI isn't quite as good as a lot of people expected at replacing these jobs. At least, not yet.
Nope.
In February 2024, the CEO of Klarna went bold and publicly announced that their new AI assistant, built with the help of OpenAI, was doing the work of 700 customer service agents, handling 2.3 million conversations in its first month across 35 different languages. And within days, the stock of Teleperformance, the world's largest call center, crashed to a 7-year low. On the surface, this seems to be a simple case of outsourced labor now just being outsourced again, but to machines. Which is what?
Yeah, but the problem is that these AI subscriptions cost a bit more to hire a worker who does the same for far less pay. But the thing is, the AI can do it 24/7 when a worker can only do it like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. The AI model will be able to do it continuously.
has happened countless times across history. However, as you might expect, problems quickly started to emerge. Now, if you've used AI at any point, then you know it has a tendency to quickly blurt out made-up stats with a supreme degree of confidence. And while that's annoying for you if it's at a personal level, if you're running a major company that has to abide by certain laws and is really crucial to nail the details, then these small AI inaccuracies can quickly turn into large-scale problems very, very quickly. For example, after just a year of announcing their new AI assistant, the CEO of Klarna publicly admitted that they'd gone too far and began to rehire the very human staff that they just fired. And we've seen this happen dozens of times across different major companies, like this quite infamous instance at Ford, where they hired back old engineers. Now, many people who are anti-AI will claim this as a victory.
Like, the thing is, you hire back the people who utilize AI because you will always need someone there who sees the incoming stuff and can react in the moment until it actually learns. That's just how it's going to take. It just needs to happen. They are becoming expensive because they need constant electricity and water supply, so you can't have them in developing nations, and developed nations aren't subsiding them as fiercely as they did. Honestly, that you said that, with India planning on building that dam, you know, along that massive seaside, imagine that entire dam built as a server farm. One massive, 600-kilometer server farm? Because you would have the water, you would have the ability to keep it cool and control the temperature, because you would have water running through it. Yeah, of course, you would have to, because I would think the two dam structure would be far better and you would map it out. But just imagine that entire thing as a server. That entire dam as a server. I mean, that would be good. You'd want to kill two birds with one stone. Elon Musk predicted that money could become irrelevant or not matter around 2036. What do you think? Money is irrelevant. Money only has the value that we as human beings have put to it. And as long as we perceive that money has value, it will continue to have value. That sounds very, very insane, but ever since we've gotten away from bartering and went into like counting money, that's just how it's been. We've always put our faith in the coin, in the dollar bill. As long as the bill has value, as long as the coin has value, it will continue to have value. It's as soon as we see it's got no value, then it's all lost.
Against the machines, and a triumph of human labor. However, in reality, I think it's something much worse. These outsourced jobs are still far from safe, and part of it is to do with a totally new profession which is emerging to speed up this transition, the AI trainer. So at a very basic level, AI learns by using lots and lots of data. And so when it's learning a human job, it does this by reading billions of recorded examples of humans doing that very job, and then effectively copying that going forward to train itself. And how good the AI is depends in part on how many examples it gets trained on, which is why the same chatbots, which are amazing in English, will perform a lot worse in Swahili, or say Burmese. What this means is that there's enormous value in having people who spent decades doing those calls sit down and correct, rank, and rewrite an AI's answers hundreds of thousands of times.
Gold is the real hard value in today's economy, especially since diamonds can now be manufactured. Been like that for thousands of years and will be for our lifetime. Yeah, exactly. Because it's the only thing that actually has true value to it. It's not etherical value that we just perceive in it. It's literally weighable. It's literally perceivable. It's literally on the spectrum of the periodic table, has value to it. Unlike a dollar bill or a coin or a Bitcoin, or like a lot of that is just ephemeral at this point. It only has value because we have, as a civilization, have added value to it and perceive that value as something.
Until it learns to get them right on its own.
Buy gold! Buy gold! No.
And this is happening across every industry, even in investment banking. So what this means is, in the short term, there's been this weird effect where there's actually been an increase in demand for people who work in call centers. A, because AI isn't quite reliable enough for them to be replaced, and B, because they're needed for this new role entirely. However, that doesn't mean that these jobs are safe. If anything, far from it. Estimates are now suggesting that within just a few years, around 89% of outsourcing jobs will be at high risk of automation. And in countries like the Philippines, researchers found that a third of workers are highly exposed to AI. Now, to put that into perspective, throughout the entire 2008 2008 financial crisis, unemployment in the US never rose above 10%, which is 3 times lower than the effect which we'd be seeing in these countries. Now, it's easy to frame large Western CEOs as the villain here, for first firing the people in an American call center because it was cheaper to set it up in India, and then 15 years later, quietly bankrupting a call center on the other side of the world to replace people with AI. However, in reality, it's quite often the CEOs of the specialist outsourcing companies who themselves are accelerating the change the quickest. They're not defending those jobs of these Indian or Filipino workers. In fact, they're doing the exact same maths as our CEO from earlier. You could hire a human for around $8,000, or an AI for $4,000, and selling that AI to their own Western clients is worth more per contract than staffing their call center ever was. In fact, TCS, one of the largest outsourcing firms in the world, grew its AI consulting revenue by double digits this year, in the same 12 months that its core outsourcing business shrank. So all of that raises an important question. What actually happens to a country when one of their biggest employers gets replaced with AI? Well, the chances are that a shock of this size would quickly spread beyond just those initial employees, due to something known as the circular flow model. The basic idea is that money doesn't just disappear once it's spent, but keeps moving through the economy from person to person. For example, a paycheck becomes rent becomes a landlord's grocery bill, and that grocery bill becomes a cashier's wage, and so on and so forth. So if you cut a few million paychecks out of that chain at once, every business that used to sell them lunch, rent them an apartment, or drive them home gets a little less income too. For one of these countries, losing an industry worth literally hundreds of billions every year would drain huge spending power out of the entire economy, creating the real risk of an all-out recession. Now, you might be wondering, haven't these kind of innovation-driven job losses happened before?
I don't think that would happen in India, especially since a lot of the families here in the United States send a big portion back to their families in India. So it continues pumping the economy full of cash.
After all, there are tons of jobs that people did hundreds of years ago that simply don't exist anymore. In fact, you could say that about pretty much most jobs, and nobody really seems to be complaining about the loss of bank tellers. However, there is a core difference between what happened in the 50s in Europe and America and what...
Oh yeah, I forgot. Going into a bank was a thing back in the day. I haven't been to the bank since I went there to close my bank account because I opened a different bank. I have forgotten about that. And that was before I went off to college. That was a long time ago.
What's happening in these countries today? Simply put, with these outsourcing economies, none of the profits will remain within the economy. When the telephone switchboard was invented in the 19th century, it put tens of thousands of manual operators out of the job overnight. And at the time, people were pretty concerned that this kind of innovation would create the downward spiral where we spoke about earlier. But as it turned out, that never happened, for one simple reason. One person's job loss is another person's profit. The invention of the switchboard saved businesses operating in the industry huge amounts of money, which they then used to fund research and build new tech, injecting it back into the circular economy. So even though thousands of people lost their jobs, the amount of money actually being spent didn't change, and new jobs were eventually created, and the economy pretty much carried on as normal. However, in the case of AI and outsourced jobs, that isn't going to happen for one key reason. The profits all go to a different country. When an American company cuts its costs by replacing a call center in India with an AI model, the savings don't go toward building anything in India. They go towards the AI company that built the model, probably in either New York or San Francisco. Because all that money never re-enters developing countries' economies, they totally lose the normal mechanism that would normally...
But that actually can easily be counterpointed, especially with India having its own AI farms. And if it invests in those AI farms, like that's just how it's going to go. The nations are going to have to focus on that themselves, and then it'll just be a recurring loop. It'll be the countries that can't develop an AI model that will be out of luck. The US has the capability to
create jobs in these instances. In fact, we might already be seeing the early signs of this. In the Philippines, unemployment has risen from about 5.1%, up from 3.8% this time last year, putting it at the highest level since the pandemic. Similarly, India is now just starting to see unemployment steadily creep upwards. And while that's far from any kind of recession, it's important to remember that we're still only at the very beginning of this process.
Does your wife like gold? Indian households are like gold black hole. Once they buy it, it stays locked in vault unless women in the house want to go to family functions and they need to wear them. I'll let my wife answer that if she wants to. She can pop in the comments and explain the gold. It's not my place. It's not my place.
Something which is likely to only accelerate and play out over the next couple of years. So this leaves these countries in a position where decades of economic progress could be set back significantly, if not wiped out entirely. And at the same time, in a somewhat bizarre twist, there's actually a unique opportunity for these companies to adjust. Remember, the original reason why these countries adopted this model of skipping industrialization and just going straight to services is that because China was so dominant at cheap manufacturing that there wasn't much space to compete. But today, that is quietly starting to change. As China becomes richer and richer, like all of the Western countries that came before them, they are slowly shifting away from manufacturing cheap products towards a more service and high-tech manufacturing economy. What this means for places like India, though, is that in a few years, a gap might open up in terms of the low-level manufacturing that China was operating in.
It's already opened up.
That would leave the countries in a strange position where their development paths would go back from agriculture to services and then to manufacturing. But regardless of what ends up happening, it's economies like India and the Philippines where the AI shock is going to hit first, not the US or Europe, which gives the rest of the world something of an opportunity to watch and see how they adapt, what problems come up, what solutions actually work, and what doesn't, before the same shock arrives somewhere else.
That's interesting, especially with AI as like a model of the future, because I'm a huge proponent of like AI is important. I think AI is going to be a good future. The problem is like AI is going to push for the socialist programs that a lot of like communist socialists of America really want. Why? Because there won't be many jobs left for those people to work, especially because they don't want to work. So there will have to be programs in place, especially as most of the entry-level jobs get taken up. Like pretty soon, the only entry-level jobs left would be like someone who cleans the buildings and I'm trying to think. Because pretty soon, like at McDonald's, maybe restaurants, maybe working in a kitchen in a restaurant. That's about it. But everyone will do their orders on a tablet. Like me and my wife went to a restaurant the other day. They had servers there, but the lady there was like, "Oh, here, you can look at this. See if you can see if you can find something on there that you would want." And I was looking at her, just like, "What the heck? This is what the heck is this?" It was just a machine. She was wanting to replace herself with a machine because she didn't want to do the work. She didn't want to do the work. But yeah, it's just, again, eventually there will be, well, and the birth rate is going down. So who knows? Maybe we are predicting the future. We need AI because pretty soon we won't have enough people to do the menial labor jobs. Well, at least in the US, the birth rate is going down. In China, the birth rate's going down. In India, it's still going up. It's hit the moon. It's hit the moon. But yeah, there needs to be things in place for that. There need to be things in place for that.
You guys got a video? What's so bad?
And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Wait on that.